Donathan awoke in the darkness, struggling to remember who he was and where he was. His mind was a jumble of thoughts, and his head was throbbing as he attempted to stand up and get his bearings. With no recollection of why he'd awakened naked, with his feet and one hand tied to the bed, he found himself standing there in this unfamiliar hotel room. Pieces of his clothing were scattered all over the floor. He grabbed his undershirt and pulled it over his head, then stuffed his arms into the sleeves of his dress shirt. What the hell was going on? For the first time, he noticed the clock on the nightstand. It read 5 a.m. Shoot, he mumbled. He'd been out for hours. He tried to remain calm, but the last thing he remembered was walking Austin to her hotel room door. Was this her room? Had he entered? There was no sign of her, but he took a look around and discovered an imprint of blood-red lipstick on an empty martini glass. For a second, he willed himself back to last night. Much to his regret, he'd arrived at Maxwell's alone. He and Sydney had argued briefly because she'd been called to the hospital to cover an overnight shift, and she'd agreed to go, even though she wasn't on call. His thoughts then moved on to Austin. She'd shown up at Maxwell's, and after he'd autographed some headshots and took a few pictures, curiosity got the better of him, and he joined her at the bar for a drink. He rushed into the bedroom and splashed some cold water on his face, then soaped a fresh washcloth, washed himself off, and haphazardly buttoned his shirt. He hurried back into the room and stepped into his boxers, slacks, and jacket as quickly as he could. Next, he patted down his pockets and found his keys and cell phone. He patted himself again, but this time he wasn't so lucky in locating the bulge he was looking for. No wallet. On impulse, he checked the nightstand. F word. Donathan grabbed his head to stop the echo. His temples were pulsating, and his throat felt like sandpaper. He knelt to the floor, felt beneath the bed, but came up empty. He grabbed an unopened bottle of water off the small desk, turned it up to his mouth, and gulped half the liquid before bringing the plastic bottle down, fixated on it. It had to be the water. That was the only thing he remembered drinking. Last night, he talked with Austin off and on for an hour. When she stood to leave, being the good Samaritan that he was, he'd offered to walk her to her car. That's when she informed him that she was new in town and was staying at the Courtyard Marriott a few blocks over. He'd walked her to the hotel, to her room, but that was it. No memory after that. Donathan stuck his black socks into his pocket and jammed his feet into his loafers. His normally sharp mind was dull, which caused his thoughts to be slow and heavy. It felt like he had a hangover, though he'd only had 2 in his lifetime. His last-minute jaunt to the men's room last night had left his open bottle of water in Austin's care and vulnerable to tampering. That effing bitch must have drugged him. 10 minutes later, Donathan walked out of the building onto 9th and Broadway. He trolled the streets looking for anything unusual, including the paparazzi. It was easy to brush off the made-up tabloid stories about him, but if a camera caught him stepping out of a hotel in a wrinkled Hugo Boss suit at this time of the morning, there would be no explaining away his actions to an eager freelance photographer. He reached 13th Street, where he parked his car and eased into the confines of his black Mercedes CL65 coupe, further assessing his situation. He could still hear Austin's voice in his head. "You're the doctor who specializes in the art of sex." Drugging him had been her plan from the start, he realized. She had arrived at the Richmond Country Club a few days ago with every intention of luring him in. He pulled away from the curve and didn't stop checking his rearview mirror until he merged onto I-80 East. The highway was empty. He coasted toward El Cerrito like a vampire trying to beat the rising of the sun. All the way home, Donathan kept thinking about the nagging consequences of an unprotected sexual encounter. When he took the San Pablo exit, he was finally able to breathe, but he was aggravated. The images of glistening red lips and laughter mocked him. Did they even have sex? Of course they did, right? Why else would he have been naked? When Donathan pulled into his driveway, his headlights illuminated a small package propped against the mailbox. He exited the car to retrieve the parcel, and then he saw her. Across the street, his neighbor, Barbara Brown, sat perched in her front window, drinking her morning coffee, a ritual Donathan saw most Sunday mornings when he went out for his morning run. He looked down at his disheveled appearance. Shoot, he cursed softly. Barbara Brown waved at him, and he knew exactly what that meant. She'd run and tell everybody who'd listen about his comings and goings, and eventually that would include Sydney. Now he had two problems. He stepped back into the car, held his head with one hand, and groaned at the throbbing as he reached the house at the end of the driveway. This would all look better once he got some rest, he told himself. He would take some Tylenol, get a few hours of sleep, then he would find that bitch Austin and fix this.